with non-contingent parenting, the child has learned that explosive, non-compliant behavior is an effective means of seeking attention or coercing adults to give in. That's basically what conventional wisdom will say. So how we interact with that, and again, we'll talk about non-conventional wisdom in a second, but how we interact with that is by intervening, right? So there is a logical way to intervene with that type of acting out. And there is that type of acting out that happens. We call them tantrums, right? Kids are throwing a tantrum because they didn't get what they want. So there is a way to do that. So basically, you want to train and you want to motivate adaptive behavior. And the way you do that is through intensive, consistent programming of contingent consequences and by ignoring the acting out, by saying, well, this doesn't really matter, let's go back to the original programming. Because basically what happens is if you give too much attention to a child when they act out, then you're giving them what they want in conventional wisdom. They want you to give them that attention. So if you ignore the problem, not ignore, but if you don't sensationalize the problem, then the problem goes away because it doesn't give them what they want. That's the idea. So basically, how this plays out is that you list the behaviors. And you say, this is the undesired behavior. Like, I notice you doing this, for instance. I notice, you're screaming. That's inappropriate. And then you give attention to consequences, both positive and negative. So here's a menu of rewards that you can have for positive behavior. Here's a menu of rewards that you get, not rewards, here's what you earn for negative behavior. And then you pay them off for compliance. So basically you allow consequences to come to bear. Negative consequences for negative decisions, positive consequences for positive decisions. So again, you list. So when you see that you're interacting with a acting out child, and that acting out child you've determined is acting out for conventional reasons, meaning that they have that they want revenge, or that they are seeking to have power, control, or that they just want attention, then you list the undesired behaviors, you list the consequences, and you enable the consequences. So those are the three basic ways of dealing with it. Now, as in every approach, there's always going to be issues with a unilateral approach, right? There's always going to be issues where it doesn't necessarily apply in every situation. So when we talk about the pros and cons of conventional wisdom, so the benefits are that you get your basics. You get your basics. Do this, don't do this. This is right, this is wrong. You get a really clear understanding of the world that's surrounding. So you can make it really clear, like, don't cross the street without holding an adult's hand, for instance. Or don't, this one says, don't swear. It's not really a problem in my house. Don't use adult words. There you go, if you're a child. No tantrums. See, these are very clear guidelines, right? And you can facilitate. It says facilitate extrinsic motivation, but what that really means is because they're clear guidelines, you can set patterns of behavior really easily by just teaching very basic set of rules, right? But the problem is humans. That's what the problem is. Humans learn, right? So if a kid already knows what those things are and knows the consequences and continues the action anyway, well, then it will no longer work, right? They have to be willing to comply in conventional wisdom. The other thing is that reward and punishment tends to dumb down the skill set of a kid because they don't necessarily have to solve a problem on their own. They just have to check the mark of like hitting this one point. And so it tends to dumb down their skill set and doesn't necessarily teach them to problem solve. If I do this, then I get this. as opposed to how do I get this, and how do I discern the rules of the world. Another problem is that it also requires a child to be at a certain level. So in other words, the rule is that you must always put your food in the sink when it's not your food, your dirty dish in the sink when it's done, right? What if the kid can't walk? What if the kid can't reach? That's probably a better one, right? Well, then do they get a consequence? So like certain rules can't be unilaterally applied because it depends on a person's one of three things: their physical ability, their emotional ability, or their intellectual ability. So you have to be careful about setting those guidelines. The other thing is that because you're just checking a mark, it doesn't necessarily teach advanced skills because, it's sort of that minimum wage for minimum effort idea. You never get further and further because you've already hit the highest potential reward. And then the last thing is that if somebody just wants to watch the world burn, like if a kid just wants, for those of you who have experience with kids, sometimes kids just want to throw a tantrum. Sometimes they just want to be miserable. Well, if they don't want things to get better, it doesn't work. So this type of conventional wisdom and the approach to dealing with conventional wisdom is an approach that can work. It can work in a pinch. It can work in the beginning of a relationship. But at some point, you have to transition. We found it best to transition. And so there's an unconventional wisdom that we use for dealing with children too. And it says, children do well if they can do well. If they can't do well, then adults need to help them figure out why so that they can do well. So I'm not going to say that this assumes the best of children so much as it assumes self-preservation. Kids want to do well. So that's unconventional wisdom. So if you recall, conventional wisdom is people just want to feel good about things, and so they'll act out when they feel bad. They try to get power, they try to get control, so on and so forth. In this, it's kids will feel safe if they can, and so if they start acting out, it's because they don't feel safe. They don't feel like they have the tools to do well. And so what you need to do is figure out how to enable them to get the tools. So, all behavior is the physical manifestation of an unmet need. Unmet need leads to child or person meeting his or her own need by any means possible. So, what happens then is that they learn to create what we call socially maladaptive behaviors. And that's going to be doing things like stealing, like hoarding food, like lying. And when we talk about lying, let's discern that we're talking about crazy lying, not like, sometimes a kid, when they're playing, will be like, I'm a fire truck. It's like they're not actually fire trucks. They don't actually think that they're fire trucks. That's just imaginative play. But that's not the same thing as crazy lying, which is, this person did this thing, did this thing, did this thing, and now they deserve a consequence. That's crazy lying. Pseudo-maturity is one of the examples that's given. That is when a kid acts like an adult but shouldn't because they're just a kid. And they do that because they feel that they have to act like an adult. Because if they don't, then the needs won't be met. So that can be taking on responsibilities of their parents. Oftentimes you'll see that, like, they'll start caring for their, say, like, little brother and sister as if they're the parents. And they'll dote on the parents as if they're the parents. That's pseudo-maturity. And it's inappropriate. It's a weight that children can't bear. So we also have to take into account learning disabilities, which, again, we kind of talked about with conventional wisdom. You have to have a certain set of skills to be able to access conventional wisdom, to be able to access a response to conventional wisdom or an intervention to conventional wisdom. It doesn't really take into account learning disabilities because if your intellect isn't there, then how are they going to operate by that level? And sometimes what you'll get is like a school, for instance, that tries to unilaterally apply conventional wisdom, and then they've got a kid who is acting out, and that school's just not set up to deal with it. So you have to have a different mindset in parenting in regard to that. So unconventional wisdom actually assumes learning disability before it qualifies as aberrant behavior. And what that means is we're assuming that the reason why you're not acting the way you're supposed to is because you can't act the way you're supposed to. So because of that, it puts everybody on an equal playing field. Everybody is developmentally delayed in this particular area, and our goal is to get everybody to the same place. So developmental delay in the development of crucial cognitive skills is in the areas of flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, and problem solving. Anybody have questions about that so far?
When you were talking about conventional wisdom, some of the payoffs, what I've heard from Lisa and also in the church is, that, here you identify the problematic behavior. If you cannot correct this, this is what I'm saying. You can't correct this. You can't be part of the group. You can't be part of the family. You can't be part of this meeting or whatever. That's a good example of that.
Of conventional wisdom, yes.
And then what would be something else? Like a sticker when they're going potty.
Yep.
Obviously not. There's $5 for not throwing it.
Yeah, consequence systems. Yeah, systems of consequence are conventional systems. And they work really well up to a point.
Up to a point, when you say up to a point, what is the...
So when a kid decides that they know better than the conventional system, then the conventional system no longer works. What's up?
So would conventional wisdom be helpful in establishing trust and care?
Yeah, absolutely.
Trust and control?
Yep, absolutely. You need trust of care, and conventional wisdom establishes that. Does that answer? Yeah. So there's not. It's not to say that. It's not to say that these two are separate and mutually exclusive. It's to say that you have to consider both factors when dealing with people, with kids, and sort of understand when you have to transition from one to another. So at a base level, conventional wisdom has to exist. There has to be base understandings of things. Unconventional wisdom comes along and says, well, maybe this person doesn't understand because of this. And so we try to get them to a conventional understanding of it where we can apply conventional wisdom again. The hope is that once they mature, they no longer need that conventional understanding. And then we can apply unconventional wisdom again. So, because unconventional wisdom is the more mature way of looking at it. And it's just an issue of problem solving a child's acting out behavior, which you're going to run into. So the best example of this for me is the child walking across the street, right? So conventional wisdom is going to say, this child is running across the street. What do they need as an intervention? Well, they need a hard and fast rule, right? That says a child may not walk across the street without holding an adult's hand. If they don't hold an adult's hand, then here's a list of consequences, and then you give them the ability to interact with those, and you enable it. So they chose. So when the child chooses to run across the street without an adult's hand, then they get a contingent consequence, a consequence that has been decided that they understand ahead of time, connected to that action, right? Now, what happens when that child becomes, 6? What happens when that child is 21 years old? And they're standing at the street and they're like, can someone please hold my hand? Right? That it becomes ridiculous at that point. Long before that point. So at that point, there should be an unconventional wisdom applied where you're looking at that situation and you're saying, why is this child then running out into the street? Why is this kid running into the street while a car is coming or whatever? You have to think differently about the problem. So if you let conventional wisdom take place too long, then people become no longer functional. But if you use unconventional wisdom and you're like, now Billy, who's a 2-year-old, I want to know why it is that you have a problem holding your parent's hand. Let's come back and talk about this. As the kid is standing in the middle of the street, what's going to happen to that kid? So you're going to get hit by a car. So you just got to pivot depending on what's going to be safest. And that's always going to be the question. As a parent, the question is, what is the safest thing for that kid? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, the reason I asked that is because with my time with Bruce, I've seen him go, he's starting to come into, I don't know if the conventional way is working anymore, because there's intellectual capabilities are developing.
Yeah.
He's starting to,
Yep, to push back. So what we do with that is so the way that we process it when a kid is no longer operating with the menu, because the rule you have to decide whether the rule is right. So this is where you apply unconventional wisdom, right? You ask yourself whether a kid is capable of dealing with it, and if they're not, or if they are, then, and all they're doing is revenge, power, or whatever, then you go back to convention. And you're like, okay, now let's take a look at our conventions. Do our conventions work anymore? And so what you got to do is you got to re-up the conventions. And that means often applying a different type of consequence, right? So yes. Yeah. Okay, so here's what an unconventional intervention, yeah, go for it. So that is what intervention looks like. So unconventional intervention looks like teaching them how to do things. But the description of conventional and unconventional wisdom is about how we look at the problem. Does that make sense? Yeah. So in terms of an unconventional intervention, which I'm literally about to discuss right now, it is identifying and teaching lagging skill sets. That's what it is. You identify and you teach lagging skill sets that create a fertile ground for maladaptive behaviors. And then you solve problems that precipitate maladaptive behaviors. So in other words, you take away the things that would cause kids to diverge from the path that's given. Now, it is very important that in this process you maintain your competent authority. Because if the kid thinks that the problem is all on their part to solve and you're just kind of playing backup to them, then they may panic because part of your responsibility is to keep the world safe. They need to know there's a safety net. So this is why you want to foster proper trust of care, proper trust of control. It says, I do know what's best for you, and I will keep you safe. So you can't just be like, okay, here's the tools, now go figure it out. You can do that as they become more and more able to adapt, and at some point you have to do that, push them out of the nest. You know that an ungodly amount of birds die, though, that way. Just saying. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's not helpful. So you got to make sure that they can actually fly. Okay, so let's talk about discipline versus punishment. Any questions before we wrap up that section? So we should disclaim this when we talk about discipline versus punishment. This is not about how we were disciplined or how we discipline children that are born to us. Oh, that's funny. This is left over from other teaching I've done. So basically when we're talking about discipline versus punishment, it's not about how we were disciplined or how we discipline children that are born to us per se. It's about our general understanding of the concept of discipline versus punishment. And we have to understand that we're talking about people, actual people, whose bodies could have been physically or sexually abused, neglected, impacted by prenatal exposure to drugs, alcohol, spiritually neglected, or abused. Everybody is special, dynamic, and unique. If you have to use physical discipline, well, then leadership at ABF is not for you. It's from another slide. But that's our teaching on physical discipline, and we'll talk about why. Because, and this is going to be true of parents too. If you have to use it, meaning not if you feel compelled to because the circumstance requires it, but if it is the only tool in your belt, okay? If it is the only tool in your belt, then there's a problem with your leadership. And that's going to be a problem for your children. All right, let's move on. Oh, yeah, there we go. Yeah, so let's bypass these slides. So this is part of our leadership training here at ABF when we talk about being around kids and like how to deal with kids. So that's why you're getting some of these slides. Okay, hit it. Reasons for discipline. So there are certain reasons for discipline that we need to consider. Number 1, we want to stop inappropriate behavior. Number 2, we want to teach consequences of positive and negative behaviors. And number 3, we want to equip one to eventually manage his or her own behavior. The reason for discipline assumes that there is a right path to be on. And so if you are not on that path, then you must return to that path. Does that make sense? It is not, here we'll look at discipline versus punishment. It is not a judicial process. It's not a way to pass judgment. It is not the leader playing the role of a policeman or a judge or a jailer, and it's not using anger to convey messages. Instead, it is using understanding and sympathy to convey messages. It is playing the role of an educator, again, not of a judge, a policeman, or a jailer, but an educator. And it is a learning process. It takes time. It's not the passing of judgment. And so oftentimes you'll see that discipline, at least here in the church, from your educators here at the church, is like, it feels kind of like a continual process. Like sometimes you'll be like, why, you may think in your mind, why don't they just do this? And then it's done. Well, it's because it's not a judicial process. We understand that people are developing. They're always developing. And so we want to, going back to the third point on the slide before, our eventual goal is to not have to discipline. What we want is self-discipline, right? And so we need to teach people, we need to teach people to equip themselves to manage their own behavior. And we can't view everything as judicial, because once things are judicial, it's just basically a list of things that they've done wrong that they carry with them, as opposed to a list of things to overcome that they still need to overcome, or things that they have overcome. It doesn't set them up for success that way. So when we look at discipline versus punishment, there's interest on the leader's part, okay? And we're using leader, but this absolutely applies to parent or co-parent, for instance. The leader is interested in the situation and its outcome versus interested in retaliation and recidivism. So, oftentimes you'll find that parents just want to get back at their kids because they've made a kid has made their parents' day or moment terrible, which that's just parenting, and and they will oftentimes want to cut off the ability for a child to make a choice in the future. So they'll want to restrict, or they'll care about recidivism, going back to a negative behavior, as opposed to that child learning and understanding this is a process. They'll apply conventional wisdom when maybe that child doesn't need conventional wisdom applied. They need unconventional wisdom. And that's when you get into like car rides. I just went on a long trip with my family, and we were in the car for a long time. And and there's these behaviors that happen in the car where kids are, they kick in the back seat, like that sort of thing, right? Well, that doesn't really need a conventional wisdom applied to it, right? It doesn't need it doesn't need a conventional intervention applied to it necessarily. It could be like, well, what's going on here? Like, do you have to go to the bathroom? Do you need to take a break? so on and so forth, as opposed to, if you don't stop, I'm going to pull his car over and beat your ass. I mean, people do that.
Yeah, for sure.
People do that. And when I care about my child learning to not do that again for the right reasons, then it's necessary for me to take a longer approach. So anyway, the focus is on what is going to happen from now on, like I said, as opposed to what happened in the past. You keep doing this. I hate when you do this. Now I'm going to stop you from ever being able to do anything again. That is not a good approach to parenting. A leader is objective with limited emotional involvement. Okay? Because for you, it is, what do you assume in unconventional wisdom? Yeah. Yes, a developmental delay. Yeah. Yep. You're assuming in unconventional wisdom that this kid has the inability to interact the way that they should. And so because you assume that, you should approach them as if they have the inability to act the way they should, which then really begs the question, why are you so angry about it? That makes sense? So, yeah, you cannot be subjective with a considerable emotional involvement. And any time that you're going to discipline, it should be removed from emotional involvement, personally. Now, does that mean that the kid can't sense emotion, or that you shouldn't give emotion? Like, let's say a kid shoves another kid, right? And there's anger involved in that, and this kid's angry. Is it good necessarily for the kid, as you're giving them a consequence, to see how angry you are about the action that they took? Yeah, I think it is. I think it's good for them to see that this is a serious issue, right? But does the consequence that comes from that, is that driven by anger? No. And you have to be really careful that your consequence isn't driven by anger. So in other words, I'm going to hurt you because you hurt this kid, and I'm gonna and it's gonna be out of my anger. No, that's a really bad idea. So what that teaches that kid as they grow up is to respond in anger. Okay, so discipline gives the individual choices then about their behavior and their consequences. Discipline says, here's the path you're on, here's the path you need to be on. Unconventionally, let's solve this together. What do I need to do to get you here? Let's make some choices about this. Punishment says, there are no choices. You have stepped over the line, and now you are SOL. Discipline respects the individual. Punishment belittles the individual. We call those ad hominem attacks. You are just a piece of blank, right? That's what punishment is. You crossed this line. I always knew you were going to cross this line. Of course you crossed this line. You're nothing but a blank, right? That's punishment. Discipline is, you shouldn't have crossed this line. Why did you cross this line? How do we get you to not cross this line? And I expect that you won't cross this line in the future because I know this about you. Discipline distinguishes between the deed and the doer, right? So it always keeps the value that God has given a child and says, again, I know who you are. You're made in the image of God. Therefore, you are capable of doing the right thing, especially when enabled by the Holy Spirit, if you have a relationship with Christ. Whereas punishment leaves us in a pre-saved state, really like a total depravity state, right? Where it says you are just a piece of blank, and that's why everything you do is wrong. You're the cause of everything bad in the world. In discipline, the individual is affirmed. but the behavior is not. I love you, I don't love what you're doing. Or I love you and I hate what you're doing. Versus the individual is rejected along with the behavior. So I hate you because I hate this behavior, or I hate the behavior, therefore I hate you. All of those things are inappropriate. Discipline is firm, predictable, and consistent. Why is it firm, predictable, and consistent? Because it establishes trust of care, right? Because again, you're assuming a right path. Hello? You're assuming a right path. Discipline is firm, predictable, and consistent. And so in order for you to assume a right path, you have to have a right path that is firm, consistent, and predictable, right? But punishment is the opposite. It's retaliatory. So basically, the way that you behave that I don't like, if I don't like it in that day, in that moment, in that mood, is now how I'm going to react to you. And you can never quite be sure how a parent is going to respond when they are a punisher versus a person of discipline. So what does that do to a child? It makes them feel like they're being tortured. Like literally, that's how you torture somebody, in case you want to know. You know, you've got your five things: pain and heat and sharp and dull and loud, I think. And then you slowly but surely gain trust and break trust. Gain trust, break trust. And you do it over and over and over again, and you do it erratically so they have no sense of up and down. No sense of like, what is that? Because one moment they're your friend, and the next moment they're hurting you, and the next moment they're making you feel better, and you don't know. Well, unfortunately, that describes a lot of parenting. It's a lot of how terrible parents deal with their children is, you know, they had a terrible day at work, now they take it out on their kids. You know, their kid said something that reminded them of something, now they take it out on their kid. But, hey, they're having a great day and they want to do something fun with their kid. You know? So now the kid learns to distrust. I don't know what mom and dad are going to do. But of course, they've got this deep love for their parents, and so they want to spend time with their parents. And they're always hoping. And so it builds this really inappropriate relationship with their parents. Versus the biblical model, where God is consistent, right? He gives a consistent set of standards, of morals. He says, this is who I am. I'm the same no matter what, all the time. And so you know, based on his character, how he's going to react in any situation, no matter the variables, no matter the nuances of the situation. So a sign of good parenting is when a kid knows my dad or my mom is going to react this way, even if they're having a bad day. So what are the implications here? Well, basically, discipline shows individuals what they did and then gives them the ownership of the problem and then gives them ways to solve it, and then it does it by leaving their dignity intact. Versus punishment, where punishment is a penalty imposed for wrongdoing which may or may not be meaningful. It shows an individual who is in control based on authority, rules, and regulations, not on relationship or ownership. And it may not leave their dignity intact either. The key to discipline is consistency and structure. The key to punishment is to cause or to undergo loss or suffering or wrongdoing. The key to discipline is that discipline gives understanding to what a parent is trying to accomplish. Look, I may not know what is best in terms of the nuance of how to do something, but this is what I'm trying to do. I want to help you get there. Versus punishment, which is I'm going to impose consequences without any understanding. I'm not going to think about it, and I'm not going to ask you to think about it. We're just going to do it my way, and we're going to do it now. Now, we see this actually playing out right now in regard to the great upheaval that's taking place with like defunding the police, for instance. Right? The difference between punishment and discipline. it is, we see it in regard to like the egalitarian debate over submission in the marriage relationship, right? The difference between punishment and discipline. This is like a seminal piece of understanding. How a kid picks up what is being taught by their parents is going to dictate how they're going to view the world. And a lot of the reason why people have such a fear of submission and such a fear of like the police, of authority, of government, is because they've grown up in a structure that is punishment over discipline. So if we want our kids to be able to actually like use their social interactions properly, then we're going to need to teach them how to live in discipline and not punishment. Your child should never fear that you're going to punish them. They can use the term punishment, because oftentimes it gets, oftentimes the term punishment gets equated. Well, it just gets connected with discipline. Oftentimes those two get connected to each other, but they're really not the same thing. Your child should never fear that you're going to punish them, because punishment is irrational. They should fear that there's going to be discipline, because discipline is hard, right? Discipline is much harder than punishment. Punishment comes and goes. Discipline is we're going to get up every day at 5 a.m. and we're going to work out. We're going to fix our bodies. That's discipline. That's hard work. We're gonna eat this way and we're not going to eat anything else. That's hard work. We're going to speak this way and we're not going to do anything else. That's hard work, right? Punishment is sort of one and done. It's several one and dones, but it's kind of one and done. Your child should not fear that you're going to punish them. They should expect that you're going to discipline them. And that expectation should lead them to disciplining themselves. Right? You don't want me to manage you because you don't feel that I'm the best to manage you. But I do agree with your goal. This is what you want your child to say back to you. I do agree with your goals in managing me. I wouldn't make the same decisions. I am capable of managing myself. Please let me manage myself. You want your child to say that to you and to be able to do it. Does that make sense?
So you talked about
No, we're not there yet. So discipline occurs throughout the day of an ongoing, it occurs all the time, ongoing basis, provides alternative responses to inappropriate behaviors, and it develops proper trust of self through teaching about good choices and rewarding when they are made. So a good point of discipline that you'll hear us say is, I want you to bring me solutions. Right? That's when somebody deviates from the system and now they've done something they're not supposed to. Sometimes you'll hear the leadership say, I want solutions. I don't want problems. I want solutions. Right? That is discipline. Punishment would say, now I'm going to strip you of everything that you've had because you've deviated from the system, Punishment occurs when the leader is essentially fed up and has little to do with what an individual did. All that was waiting for was the straw. The straw broke the camel's back. It could have been anything. It could have been small, could have been big, but you couldn't stop the bomb from becoming. So, because of that, an individual doesn't really learn anything. They don't learn more appropriate alternative behavior because they don't know what appropriate behavior is, because at any moment it would be appropriate or inappropriate based upon how somebody feels. So what is it that they learn instead? That's true, but they learn something else. They learn how to manipulate the system. So instead of having right behavior, righteousness that they learn and being disciplined, instead they learn how to keep the authorities satiated. Like a chameleon, yes. So then they learn to, play up the person. Like I remember this episode of The Office where they were trying to get Michael to do something with money, right? There was going to be an extra amount of money at the end of their season, and some people wanted them to take the extra money and put it toward chairs. Some people wanted to put it toward copy machines, right? And so they all start treating Michael differently based upon that. Pam goes in and she starts laughing and giggling at his jokes to try to get him to do this. Why? Because Michael, as a boss, is very temperamental. And she's learned that if you reason with him, it is not stronger to get the desired outcome than if you flirt with him. Okay, so she starts flirting with him, and then he's super excited and happy and wants to give her whatever she wants. Well, that system starts here, right? Make my parents happy. Get them, I set the tone for it, and then I can just get whatever I want from them.
That's teaching the kid not to be like who they truly are, and also that they haven't, I guess, negotiated adversity as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so there's good skill sets in that. Like Paul says, I become as, the Romans when I'm in Rome. But ultimately, righteousness is based upon maintaining the same standard no matter what, no matter the consequences. Right? We hold to God's standard no matter what. And the things that we teach our children should be based upon God's standard, because we know that living righteously is what's best for them. But if we teach them to navigate the system just to appear righteous so that nobody gives them a hard time, so they never get negative consequences, well, what happens is on the outside they look good, on the inside they're being slowly eaten away and their life gets destroyed. We're not setting them up for success, we're setting them up for failure. So we need to be really, really careful about not punishing them, because that's what happens. People will adapt. They'll figure out how to not be punished as opposed to how to solve problems. Yeah, is your microphone on?
Is this live?
Should be.
Test 1, 2, test. Yeah. Test.
Is it?
I don't hear it.
Well, it's got tape on it. It's on. Well, I don't know I can't read with this tape.
So when a child's in a controlled environment, when you have them at home, then you can bring those things and work with those things in order to set that up so it happens. Where it becomes difficult is if a child goes outside of the home environment and sees at school, sees with his friends that this manipulation is what everybody else is doing, they too want to join in that manipulation process. And that's where the parent has to constantly be on top of it and to guard against the influence that is going to come in from the outside to break that down.
Well, and it also, even inside the home, when you have broken families, when you have like older siblings who learn to manipulate the situation, what you're doing is you're teaching your child how society works, right? And now when they go and they build their own society, it's not based upon actual fact and righteousness and all these things. It becomes based on politics, essentially, campaigning and platforming and, and playing people against each other and that's what you get. And children, they pick up on that real quickly. It's not about being righteous before God. It's about how to make one parent happy over the other. That's how I'm going to make the system work. Unfortunately, again, as we've seen in our own politics, in adult politics, that doesn't benefit the end user. It makes it worse.
That's why parents, when it comes to discipline, parents have to be on the same page. So parents constantly need to be talking with each other about methodology and also aware of certain things. You know, it's not unusual when you have multiple children for one child to go to mom or to go to dad to get one answer, and then if they're challenged, say, well, dad said it's okay, or mom says it's okay. And so then you have to coordinate as parents to make sure that a consistent answer is being given to the child, because they will they will try and double team you.
Yeah. All right, so the best results possible for leaders come when they're very, very clear. Remember, it's all about setting boundaries and trust of control. That's how you're going to get a child to mature. So when leaders are clear, and the best way to do that is for leaders to be clear by saying what they are going to do. So this is what I am going to do as dad. This is what I am going to do as mom, right? And then the next thing, of course, is going to be to push the kid to ask the question, so what are you going to do? So here's what I'm going to do as dad. You have stepped out of line. Here's what I'm going to do as dad. Now, I'm going to do what I need to do, completely devoid of emotion on the subject. You know, there's a contingent consequence that needs to happen. So I'm going to do that. Now the question is, what are you going to do with it? Are you going to whine? Are you going to cry? Are you going to continue in your bad behavior? Or are you going to take this moment, process it, and turn it into something where this is not going to happen again? Because it doesn't happen again. Or it doesn't have to happen again. It's up to you. You put that choice back into their hands. When confronted with a problem, good leaders use meaningful actions. The term that you'll hear us use over and over and over again, and you've heard in this presentation, is contingent. The term contingent means something dependent upon another thing. Consequential actions, cause and effect actions. So the one that always got me was, getting grounded from television. I never understood getting grounded from television. And I would hear that from from kids all the time when I was growing up. Like, I can't watch this show, because you guys don't understand, you younger folks, but back in the day we couldn't time shift television. That's right. We couldn't time shift television, and we didn't have DVRs, and so we couldn't time shift television, and we didn't have DVRs. So if you missed a show, you missed a show. Like
Similar to VHS.
You missed a show, and so you had to catch it in reruns if it played again, and so on and so forth, right? So it's that was a big deal, if you were going to miss the next episode of Knight Rider or something like that. It's you're never going to see that show again. So it was it was a real consequential thing, I'm going to take away your ability to watch this episode forever, Now it's I can watch it at any time, any moment, I just, pull it up. But anyway, that would happen all the time. People would be like, oh, I stayed out too late playing with you, now I can't watch, now I can't watch this show. What does that have to do with anything? It doesn't have to do with anything. They're not connected to each other. So because they're not connected, it teaches the kid that consequences aren't connected to actions. And that's a problem, right? So good leaders use meaningful actions, and then, here's another thing, they use few words. Sometimes you'll hear us say, what did I say? Or, I didn't say that. Or, sometimes you'll hear us say that, right? Because a kid wants you to explain over and over and over and over again. And they want you to process things over and over and over in all these different ways. No. A child needs to process for themselves. And so you give them clear dialogue, and then you help them process that by letting them process it. If you constantly explain it over and over and over again, you cheapen your own words. You teach that child to not understand what you're saying out the gate. Right? You teach them that basically when you say something, it needs to be explained 10 times before they can understand it. You did that. So they need to be taught, no, you're not going to use all of these explanations to get a point across. Because in these cases, the only time you're going to be giving these consequences is when?
When the child is off the path.
Exactly. If the child's on the path, there's no reason to give them these types of consequences, right? So when the child steps off the path, do you really think they don't know they're off the path? They know. We all knew, right? They know too. So you don't need to go on these crazy explanations. All you need is for them to get back on the path. So meaningful actions, contingent actions, few words. My thing says, they wrap consequences in a loving blanket of empathy. It's true. It's a true statement. The other thing that is necessary is that leaders must follow through. Okay? If you say you're going to do something, because remember, parents get best results by saying what they're going to do and doing it. If you only go halfway, then you've taught your children that your word means nothing. And this is all about cheapening trust of care. Okay? So it's all about strengthening trust of care would be the other way to say that. If we diminish that by saying too many things, we diminish that by being non-contingent, we diminish that by not following through, then our children will not learn to follow through. They will learn to be non-contingent, and they will learn to be political. You know, I can baffle them with my BS. They will not learn to be righteous. So, what we really want to offer kids is the ability to control themselves. Ultimately, that's what we want. If you think that your job as a parent or as a leader is to control people, then this is not the job for you. You should not have a child. You should donate them. donate them. Or as Pastor Monty says, get neutered or control yourself. Our job is to not want control. Our job is to want to put more people in the world who the image of God is represented in, right? And so basically we want to offer control to people. And that should always be our mindset. You should always be looking at your kid as what things can they learn to control and to control well. I think about Solomon and how he was given the keys to the kingdom, right? And he asks for wisdom. And specifically, he asks for wisdom in order to do right by the keys to the kingdom. He wants wisdom in order to manage God's household well. That's why God is impressed with him. That's why God says, I'm going to give you so much wisdom that you'll be the wisest person ever. Right? So, it's the same thing. We want to give that to our kids. We want them to be able to manage everything well. So then the question becomes, how do you offer that? So here we look at Love and Logic. And there's a book series, it's a whole series now, of Love and Logic, where they have a few helpful methods. So we've borrowed some stuff from them. So they talk about it as choices. So the Love and Logic way to offer choices is this. And we found these to be helpful. You offer choices that first you are willing to live with. This is a very, very important thing. I'm going to go back to television, okay? One television in the house, it's in the living room. No, you cannot watch contingently. You non-contingently, I'm going to punish by telling you that you can't watch television, for 2 weeks. Here's the problem. There's a television in the house, it's in the living room, and you want to watch television. So now what happens? Well, you're punished. Right? Either you're punished or you don't follow through. Right? So now you watch in front of your children, and they learn that they can get dad to not follow through, right? And so the world then becomes what? Unsafe. Okay? So, very, very important. Only offer consequences that you are willing to live with.
So that means you have to stop and think. Before you offer consequence, you have to think how that consequence might affect you.
Yep.
And is the consequence supposed to affect you, or is it supposed to affect the child? And so you have to think carefully about how you're going to apply that consequence. But if you make the mistake of giving a consequence that does affect you, you need to follow it through and live with your own consequence for having not made the consequence applicable to the child so that they can learn.
Okay, so then the other thing is you need to use the two-choice system, right? What do you want for dinner tonight? That is an open-ended statement, okay? And maybe that's a bad example, but we'll go with it. What do you want for dinner tonight? That's an open-ended statement. The kid starts listing off 5 billion things, right? That's not a good way to offer choices. That's not how choices are in life, despite what woke culture tells you now. Choices are binary. They really are. That's what makes them a choice, right? And so in order to teach kids a system that they can actually handle, where it's not 5 billion things and they have an input overload, we give them 2 choices. Do you want mac and cheese tonight, or do you want, chicken strips? Okay? My wife would be cringing right now. So now, a clever way to do this so that you can have a choice or a consequence that you can live with is to offer them something really bad that you don't want, and then something they would, and then something that's really good and enticing to them, so they feel like they have the choice, and they made that choice, right? Do you want pizza, or do you want octopus tonight?
Do you want chicken strips or a kale salad?
Yeah. So, So in terms of giving them choices, you give them two choices. Now, I'll tell you, this works with adults too. Humans have this thing about choosing. You do it really quickly. You tell them there's a choice in front of them. You do it really quickly, and they will inevitably be like, Okay? That's kind of how it is. My wife tries to do that to me, and I'm like, I'm not a child. But just watch out for it. Sometimes you'll see the leaders do that. They'll be like, this or this. Why? Because it works. It works with people. And so when you are dealing with kids, you want to offer choices, and you give them 2 choices so that they can process it. Too many more choices, and it's hard for them to process.
And you don't let them deviate from those choices.
Yeah.
These are your 2 choices. Well, no. This or this.
Yep.
Make your choice.
Yeah. You offer those choices before you issue commands. So again, this dinner, and then they choose, and then you say, okay, well, this is how you go about making this dinner. Okay? And then when a child declares no, it's become too late to offer a choice. So if a child says, no, I'm not going to participate in the system, what they are saying, and this is what you teach them, is then you are deciding you no longer have a choice. You saying no is you saying, I will not choose. Okay, well then I choose for you. And that's very, very important. So, what's the impact of the following on a parent-child relationship? What's the impact of multiple warnings and idle threats?
If you make it multiple warnings, you're not a man or woman of your word. You have no
Yep.
integrity.
That's right.
You don't know. I don't know. I think of like your example, like that's Porter.
Yep.
He continually make these, threats, warnings,
Yep.
and he's never following through. They don't know when that's going to come.
Yep.
And if it's about the same issue, and you're not around it, your emotions are going to cause you to feel subjective in how you apply that consequence.
Yeah. So here's a basic message. The basic message you see down at the bottom. I say what I mean what I say, I do what I say I'll do. That's the basic message that you want everything that you say to show a child. Now, as a parent, you want to be mature enough to not make stupid statements that then you have to live by, right? Again, going back to the TV illustration. But and using the using the construct of then being a man of few words or a parent of few words will help you with that. The scripture's really clear about that. Don't run your mouth. Few words is better. Even a fool seems wise when they speak very little, right? So, I mean what I say what I mean. This is what you want a kid to understand. Why? Because it makes the world safe. That person's predictable. I don't even like that person, but I know that I can trust that person. Because if they say what they say, then they mean what they say, right? And that's way more valuable than liking that person. I will always value being able to trust somebody I don't like over being able to not trust somebody that I do like.
I would just reiterate that this is the long game. It's not a short game, it's a long game. So once you are in it, you constantly have to be aware of what it is that you're trying to do. Because it will be challenged, there'll be the instance of laziness. You'll just be lazy because you don't want to, it's inconvenient to you, but you're in it for the long game. So once you establish this and you have children, my wife used to tell me all the time, women say it all the time, not to be chauvinistic, but women say it all the time. I carried that child for 9 months. Yeah, I carried my child for 18 years or more. Meaning that you have to be in it for the long game.
So you got to be careful because it's really easy to turn choices into threats. Do this or you're fired, right? That's the example. Like, would you rather do that report today or would you rather get fired? That's not what we mean by giving choices, okay? You want a person to learn to manage themselves. If you're in business, one of the things you'll learn if you're a manager is that it costs a lot more time and a lot more money to retrain somebody, right? It's a lot harder to fire somebody than it is to take a person and teach them how to be a good employee, somebody who's already there. Well, the same is true for children. When you have to start over, it's really, really difficult. So it's better for you to not throw them away, like just pass them off to somebody else and get another child or whatever, which I know sounds ridiculous, but it's something that happens. Like it actually happens. Like you'll see siblings where it's like a parent did terrible with the first child and then focused on the other child. And then the older child grows up being like, well, what about me? And it's a real thing. Yeah. So what you want to, there's a few examples. You need to figure out your own way of doing this, but what would be best for you? ? Would you rather do this or this? Not would you rather file a report or get fired, but would you rather, it's before bedtime, okay? Would you rather clean your room right now or brush your teeth? Okay? So now what I've done, say Joseph is a really good example. My Joseph, he is, kind of wild, right? He wants to feel that he has choice. So it's not, go do this or you're going to get spanked or whatever, right? Until he does what? Until he says no. Right? Because no means I have no choice.
You offered him, go to bed or brush your teeth. He says, no, the bowl.
Well, clean your room or brush your teeth because he's getting ready for bed. he says no to one of them, okay, well now you don't have a choice anymore, right? And then if he says, so now you have to brush your teeth. So now if he says no to that, now he requires discipline, right? But I'm going to offer him choice so he feels in control because I want him to be in control. It's not just so he feels in control, but I actually want him to be in control. And I want him to be able to categorize so that when he goes into his life and he's trying, and I'm no longer there, Michelle is no longer there, and it's just him, and he sees these things he's got to do before he goes to bed, he can be like, I'm going to take 2 things and I'm going to cross them off a list. It's going to be easy for him to get them done now because his whole life he's been given choices in chaos.
So, so the idea of the long game here is that what you're doing is you're establishing, when children are small, you're establishing their trust, you're providing security for them. Now, when you do this, as they get older, then you can begin to negotiate with them. But when they're young like this, choice. This choice, that choice, you don't like those choices, now I choose.
Yeah. So develop your own phrase. I personally like the feel free to one that's up there. Feel free to brush your teeth or pick up the room. It's time to go to bed. Feel free to brush your teeth, pick up the room, whatever, because it makes the child feel more empowered. Again, it works on adults too. And sometimes Shayla will do that to me. Like, could you do this or that? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I see through that. Like, I'm going to choose to do what I want to. And then I usually do one of the two. Because usually they're good solutions. Yeah. So, but you need to figure out that. But a choice between a threat and a credible option, that's not really a choice. All right, so we want to direct solutions. You need to have a statement of empathy. You need to send a power message. You need to offer choices. You need to have a person state the consequences, make sure that they understand what they are. That was what we talked about, like developing a menu of consequences. And you need to give permission, this one's really important, for the person to either solve the problem or not solve the problem. So everybody has their own statements. So my statement of empathy is, anyone know?
Sorry you made that choice.
Nope. That sucks. That's my statement of empathy. If you listen carefully, you'll hear me say it. If you think back, you'll hear when somebody's done something that I think is not, a proper whatever, you might hear me start off my statement by, that sucks. And then I'll end it by saying something like, what'll you do different next time? Right? That's the nutshell of this process, directing solutions. What do you think you're going to do is a power message, right? Because what it says is you're in control of the end result. Okay? You have the person state the consequences. What did you do that created this? And what were the consequences of it? And how do you get to point B next time? And then you give a statement that gives them permission. So that's how I do it. What's the problem here? Tell me what happened. What's the problem here? You'll hear me oftentimes coming to a kid. Tell me about this. Tell me the situation. They'll tell me the choices that they made that sucked. And instead of being like, well, of course that happened because you're a piece of blank, right? Which a lot of parents will do. I'll say, that sucks. What do you think you'll do different next time? Right? Because what I've done is I've enabled that child to understand that they're responsible for the choices, that I do understand that it sucks, because I do, and that they can change the outcome next time. That's how I offer choices.
You're teaching them problem solving. And if they don't know,
Then you help them with it. You say, well, let's think about this. Yeah, what are some ideas that you have? What could you do? Could you do this? Could you do that? What worked? What didn't work? The message being sent by that is that you can solve a problem any way you want to, as long as it doesn't create more problems. That's the goal. You want a child to be able to manage themselves. Okay, so there's alternative phrasing for empowering ownership. So sometimes you say one thing, but you mean another. In this case, you should just be aware of these things. So sometimes when you want to say what a child should do, you can tell a child when they can do something. And that will allow them to make the choice as to when they want, like it'll allow them to make that choice.
So give them like two different, so you want them to brush their teeth, give them two different maybe time frames
Yes.
to do that.
No. We don't want to give children. Sure. Maybe if it's something that they were going to already receive. So, telling a child what you will not allow can be phrased as telling a child the conditions under which the adult will do something, or you will allow something. So, in other words, no, I'm not going to let you, go down to here with your friends. Okay, that's one I've received quite a bit actually. The juice store down there. Instead, saying, yeah, you can do that this way. Right? So then it gives them the ability to measure up to something. Telling the child what you won't do for him or her, instead of describing the choices that the child has to do for themselves. So instead of being like, no, I'm not going to do that for you, instead being like, well, here's what you can do to reach your goals. So there's benefits to giving control. Obviously, a person who has control, a person who feels he has some control over his life will spend little time and energy trying to then control you. Right? Because they have time to... Controlling yourself is hard enough. They're not going to spend a lot of time trying to control you if they're controlling themselves. A person who feels they have no control over their life will spend all of their time trying to control you, right? And so, and the system around them. So that's really important. Also, people who feel a lack of control, recognition, and or appreciation, they often find ways to sabotage you and to get revenge. So, and they do it a lot because brains are lazy. And so when they're in a pattern, they just behave in that pattern. And that's where you get the kids who, a really good example is the class clown, right? And they sit in class and they do something negative over and over often because they're bored, not necessarily bad students, oftentimes very bright, right? And you'll hear that cliche of, well, so-and-so is really bright, but, well, what that is oftentimes that kid is bored and is not being engaged properly, right? So what do you do to make that work? Well, you give them some control. Another way of phrasing it is you make them a part of the solution rather than a part of the problem. I will relate to you a short story. I had an employee once who was a part of the problem. A huge part of the problem. He was inciting other employees. He was talking smack, talking about the management, talking about how he could do it so much better, and so on and so forth. And I sat him down and I said, look, you're going to get fired because of the way that you're behaving. I don't really want to fire you, though. I think that you're just not being used properly. So this is where they want to go. But before they go this direction, because he's being watched on cameras and so on and so forth, and my upper management is like, hey, this is a problem. So I'm like, before they go this direction, I'm thinking maybe I want to offer you a job as a projectionist. And I want you to get your feet wet with management and just kind of see what you think about it. And, instead of being a part of, instead of just constantly saying what you think is wrong, maybe give you an opportunity to have your voice heard more. And maybe you can help us input some of these solutions that you're saying we should have. That was 10 years ago. That employee is still the manager of that business today. Because I made him a part of the solution and not a part of the problem, right? So it's really important to like care about the end goal and end result. Parenting with love and logic helps leaders learn to build positive relationships with their people. Now, it's really important to allow people to suffer consequences. As soon as a person is able to safely suffer consequences to decisions, they should then be given the opportunity to make decisions. That's a scary one. I like to drop it down to when a person can say no. So when a child can say no, now they're ready to be given the choice to say no. So now you should be offering them two choices. And now they can say no or yes, no or yes. And they can choose, and that gives them control over their world. Building contingent consequences. You have to ask yourself, is the consequence tied to the time of place or the interaction? Is the consequence similar to what would happen to an adult who acted that way in a real world? I'm just kind of summarizing because we're summing up the teaching, okay? So, again, trying not to be angry. Anger causes people to look at the leader's anger instead of at his or her life and his or her decisions. This is why we need to be removed in our, it sounds weird, but we need to be removed in our empathy. We need to be like, instead of being angry with something, be like, that sucks. An equal balance of empathy and consequences causes people to look at their own life. And you guys have all seen that, right? Like if somebody who's in leadership or a parent blows up at you, you're less likely to pay attention to what you did versus what they're doing. So, yeah. So when we go back to these things and we apply them to consequences versus punishment, again, what we're getting is that in a consequence, it's very much like discipline versus punishment, right? In a consequence, there's an offering of opportunity, but if it is punishment, then the leader just makes all the decisions. Consequence allows a person to hurt from the inside out versus from the outside in. Consequence, the person basically has no opportunity to displace his or her anger. But in punishment, the leader provides opportunity for the child to be angry and resentful instead of working on a solution. With a consequence, the child can work on a solution. Here's how you can fix it. What will you do different next time? Right? That's my phrasing. What will you do different next time? In a consequence, the person has an opportunity to develop a new plan. They can change their behavior. They don't have to react. In punishment, the person basically is just paying for whatever debt they've accrued. In a consequence, the person judges themselves. In a punishment, the adult is the judge. In a consequence, the person sees the adult as modeling problem-solving techniques, being a model for behavior, whether good or bad, for the record. They can say, I would or would not make that decision. They're showing that they understand their choice. But in a punishment, the person feels the imposition of power, and then they learn to manipulate that power instead of making wise choices. In a consequence, the leader's voice is helpful and it's friendly, whereas the punishment is that the voice is like angry and hurtful. In a consequence, the person learns about the real world because we've made sure the consequences are contingent, right? That you get, that's what I like. Not that I think that we should impose this, but I like the idea that you steal an apple and your hand gets chopped off. Right? Not going to steal an apple again. I'm not saying we should impose that at all. On the other side, the person learns about the imposition of power. What they learn is that power is, something to not be trusted. And the scripture says that God put these powers and authorities in place for our benefit, to uphold the law, so that we could live safely, not so that we could live in fear of it. But we don't want our kids to live in fear of their fathers or their government. we want them to like live safely under those things. In a consequence, we are left understanding that good decisions lead to good feelings. But in punishment, we understand that poor decisions lead to us hurting. That's not what it should be. Poor decisions and good decisions should lead to the opportunity for us to grow. That's what Scripture says, right? Scripture says when you encounter trials of every kind, well, you should count it as joyful, right? Well, it is talking about trials that are imposed upon them, for the record, but it does say of any kind. So that means everything that is trials, whether you impose them or not, they should be things that are that lead to your growth if you have the right way of looking at your choices and so on and so forth. So here are the things that here.
Let me interject there.
Yeah.
So, is this getting already? I don't think so. So, ultimately, your goal as a parent is to train your child so that they become productive as an adult in society. So everything that Josh has been describing here, the end goal is for an adult child to be able to be productive in society and to learn how to make choices. I would say the number one, if you want to be successful in life, the number one thing you need to learn how to do is to make choices. You will make choices all your life. Are they going to be productive or counterproductive? What Josh has laid out here, the end goal is you are training your child to make productive choices in everything that they do because they understand the consequence and they own up to the consequence because they have the ability to change what they've done that was counterproductive. And so part of your discussion as they grow older is this productive towards what you want to do, or is it counterproductive?
Yeah. I thought you wanted to do this. This confuses me. I almost sounded like Christopher Walken there for a second. I can't do it. It just happened. It was like a unicorn. Anyway, yeah. The responsibility of adults is to not be reactionary, right? The problem is that oftentimes we're at our wits' end because dealing with our own lives is difficult enough. And so we tend to react. And so, like, you want to control your reactions. Here's some statements that will not be helpful to you. Like, this will teach you a good lesson. That's not a helpful statement. Displaying anger or disgust, rationalizing of consequences. Well, you see, I had to do that because, when you do that, I see that all the time, and I'm disgusted by it, and I hate it. I had to do that, but it's okay, honey. It'll be, no. You chose that consequence, you get that consequence. Next time, if you don't like it, choose a better consequence, right? So rationalizing, moralizing or threatening, being like coming down from a moral high ground of like, I'm better than you and only a good person would choose this action and you're obviously a bad person because you chose this action. Talking too much, we talked about before, feeling sorry and giving in. Well, I guess this time, but please in the future treat me better. They won't. Because people are lazy and now you've taught them something. You've taught them that you're weak. That's what you've taught them. And they will manipulate that system. Contriving a consequence for the purpose of getting even. That happens all the time. Now I'm going to be petty to you because you did this to my life. Sorry, but guess what you're dealing with the consequences of as a parent? Your choice to have a child. So you need to deal with the consequences of your choice also. And that's when sometimes you'll hear me say, the other thing you hear me say is choices, right? Sometimes a parent will say, oh, this sucked and blah, 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 right? And they've clearly made all of these choices leading up to their child feeling like they can manipulate them, so on and so forth. And I'll just be like, choices, right? Because you made your choices. Phrases that do work, though. What a bummer. When was this written? Really, I know you, and I'm sure you'll come up with something. Gee, that's terrible. Golly gee, that's terrible. How are you going to handle it? I like how you're going to handle it. Gosh, I'm glad that's not my blank. You must feel awful. I don't like that one, actually. But I like the ending statement. What can you do about it? Especially with report cards. What can you do about it? Have you tried this? How can we this? Blah, 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 right? I like this one. That's really an interesting way of looking at it. Let me know how that turns out. I like that one a lot. And I like the statement of, how's that working out for you? You'll hear me ask that one a lot in counseling. Yeah, I say that one a lot. How's that working out for you? Let me know what you come up with. So there's a method. It's called the COOL method. It means control, that's shared, ownership of the problem, opportunity for thinking, and let empathy and consequence do the teaching. So control, ownership, opportunity, and let. We already know why kids need to have control, so I'm going to blow through this real quick, okay? Why kids need some control over their lives, how to give control away and keep some for yourself, offering choices that make everyone happy. C is for control. When we share the control, we get our share. When we hoard the control, we lose it all. If you say, hurry up, that takes away control from the child, often provoking them to slow down in order to regain control. You could say instead, how about would you rather get dressed quickly now or have to change in the car? Right? See the difference between the two? You're giving them a choice.
Think about that choice.
Why we give control. It builds responsibility, prepares them for the real world, develops proper understanding of self. Why we allow for failures. Because a child needs a learning experience when the price is small. That's, when the price is small. So whenever a child screws up, we re-give them control. So we allow them consequences, we re-give them control. That's why I ask, what are you going to do different next time? Because I'm telling them that the control is still in their hands to change the situation. What are you going to do different next time? It communicates trust, and it says, you are capable. This is where learning occurs. So that's control. O is for ownership. Parents who have trouble figuring out who owns the problem creates many problems for themselves and their kids. What do I mean by who owns the problem?
The only thing I can think of, right, is that the child has made a decision, and they're off the path. It's not a good decision. The parent attempts to take control of that.
So, the problem doesn't belong to the parent, right? The problem belongs to the child. They should have control. When they choose not to have control, then the parent has to give control back to them. Here's a choice for you, right? If you choose no choices, then you get the consequence that you chose, right? Here's the default. See, there's never not a default. And that's the truth for us too as people, right? The default consequence is what for us as people? Well, what's the consequence God imposes? Hellfire, right? Eternal damnation. There is a default consequence that we choose. So God gives us control, and He always gives us control. And when we choose not to follow His choices for control, then eventually He lets us make our own choices for control that lead to eternal damnation. But He makes it clear what the consequences are, right? So that's the same thing. It's not, and this is where people go wrong, but it's not His problem, it's not His fault when He's given every opportunity for people to repent, but they choose not to, right? And well, it's the same thing here with this parenting. It is not our problem when a child has the consequences of their actions that they chose. And the problem is that a lot of times parents choose to take away the consequences of actions and even the choice to make those consequences happen in their life because they think it's their problem. I need to keep my child safe. If I don't do that, I'm being a bad parent. No, you're being a bad parent by thinking that keeping your child safe is removing control from them.
So
Look around you, and you can see this, what Josh is describing. You can see this all around you in society today. We have people out there who live within a victim mentality because they've never been allowed to suffer consequence. Look at some of these people that have committed, listen to the parents of some of these people that have committed horrific crimes. And all the parents do, instead of saying, my child made this choice and now he's going to live with it, all they do is make excuses for their children when they're making horrific choices which affect them and a lot of other people, because the parent has been in this mode of taking the problem away from the child. It's all around us today.
Yeah, and we as parents we do that because we become overwhelmed with with things about us, with messages about ourselves. We are not good parents. I don't want people to think I'm a bad parent, so I'm going to take this away from my child so they appear perfect. Therefore, I'm not a bad parent, right? What is that? Well, that's the manipulation we talked about earlier. Instead of actually being good at something and having righteous behavior, we manipulate the way the audience perceives it so that then we appear to be good, right? And now we're teaching our children to do that too. But it's bad. That's a bad thing. We steal the opportunity from our kids. And the thing is, as we've talked about, a child that feels they're out of control will behave maladaptively so that they can gain control. So it's better for you to give them control. And part of that is ownership. And letting a child own their problems. This is not my problem. I am here to help educate you on how to solve your problems. So I'm going to help you solve your problems, but it's not my problem. And if you want my help, bring solutions. We can work through those solutions together. But ultimately, I'm not going to be around forever. And you don't want me to be around forever. So you don't want me to manage you forever. So let's work together to come up with solutions to solve your problem. The other O in the cool method is opportunity. And that means setting limits. It means providing thinking words versus fighting words. Instead of exasperating your children, leading them to anger, giving them fighting words, give them words that make them think. Turn your words from garbage into gold, according to this book. Kids have a difficult time, and this is carried over from ownership. Kids have a difficult time learning to think that their parents do their thinking for them. All humans, including children, have strong needs for control. Love and logic parents help their kids get their control needs met through several healthy ways, including enforceable statements, choices, and guiding them to solve their own problems. So they need opportunity to solve problems. If you don't give them opportunity, then they will fail, which is why every opportunity you give to a child. They fall down, you give them a choice. What will you do different next time? It's not because you have no empathy. It's not because you're like, ha ha, like the kid, ha ha, like the kid in, not South Park, Simpsons. Like the kid, Ralph. Like the kid in The Simpsons. It's not because you enjoy watching them get hurt. It's because you enjoy watching them solve problems, right? And they can learn to now laugh at the problems and perhaps say ha-ha to themselves that they fell down. But if you remove the opportunity and you're like, I snatch you away from the danger, as many parents will. A kid falls down and they just run and grab them. It's okay. Now we're going to make you wear a helmet so you don't get hurt, right? Or we're going to put a leash on you so you don't get lost. That was a big thing when I was in my early 20s.
Yeah.
That's disgusting. Your child will learn that they're an animal.
Little leaks like they're a dog.
Yeah, that they're just an animal, a meat machine not made in the image of God. And they'll behave as such. No, you have to give them opportunity for them to make choices. The last one is let. You have to let the things that you've taught, the things that you've shown, permeate in them, right? Consequence versus punishment. Let consequences take over versus punishment. Let empathy and consequences take over versus anger. Let constructing logical consequences happen, so on and so forth. Those things have to happen. But of course, like we talked about, you have to give that heavy dose of empathy. And that means some sort of statement that you really mean, not, that sucks. But like a statement that you really mean, like, I understand that you're hurting. Like, I really get that you're hurting. That's important.
So when children are small and you're in this process, you're constructing the consequence so that they begin to understand how they relate together. As they get older, you're not going to have to construct consequence. Life will have consequence based upon what they do or don't do.
Yep.
You don't, the hardest thing for a parent to do is to not rescue their children from the consequence of their own making.
For a caring parent, anyway.
And
Yeah.
that you have to do that. Now you have to let them know that, you'll empathize with them. I used to tell my kids when they were teenagers and they were going to go out and they're outside of my control, think carefully about what you're going to do, how you're going to drive, how you're going to conduct yourself, because if you end up in jail, don't expect me to come get you. I won't. Now, of course, they always said, "Oh, come on, Dad. You're a teddy bear." I said, "Try me." My kids were smart, though. They never did. They were good. But I would have let them stay in jail.
Yeah, my thing has been similar in the sense that I will visit you in jail.
Yeah, and pray for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll visit you in jail. I'll come read the Bible to you.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to I'm not going to not let you suffer the consequences.
I'll empathize with you.
Yep.
Oh, man, son, this sucks.
Yeah. It's important when you're giving empathy to use similar phraseology. The reason why is you're training people. So that's why like some of you knew that I say that sucks, right? Because really what I'm doing is I'm training you. I'm training you to walk through a sequence of thought processes, right? So everybody knows that sucks is followed by what will you do different next time, right? So basically I'm initiating a thought process in you, like click training a dog, right? And I'm initiating a thought process in you when I say that gets you to say it in your brain without me saying it. Because ultimately what I want is for my voice to be in your head even when I'm not there. That is how you're going to keep your child safe, right? Because your child walks into a situation and they come up to the street and they say, Dad wouldn't want me to do this, right? Or they get hit with something, they fall down and they say, Dad would want me to get back up. What are my choices? What will I do differently next time so that this doesn't happen again, right?
The moment they find themselves saying to themselves, "This sucks," that's going to come to mind. This is,
Yep.
Yeah, and it's just going to follow through.
So the way that that's going to work is if you're sympathetic or if you're empathetic but you don't express anger, you're contingent in your thought process. If you do that, then you'll be fine. And it really helps to delay consequence. So what that means is, I don't want to talk about that right now. You're safe, so we're going to talk about that later. Okay? It's a really helpful tool when dealing with children because they can be really overwhelming. Just warning you, they can be really overwhelming. So you say, look, that situation sucks, but right now we're going to finish dinner. Right now we're going to watch this movie that we were going to watch. Right now we're going to participate in relationship because my relationship with you is not broken by this action that sucks. That being said, we will talk about this later. And then you can add the fun little line that I like to add. Anyone know what it is?
Try not to worry about it.
Yes, try not to think about it. Yep, there it is. Yeah.
But if you do that, then be sure that you follow through, because now your integrity is on the line.
Yes.
Don't forget about it. Make a note to yourself, do whatever you need to do, but you're going to come back to that and deal with it, and the child knows you're going to do that. That provides security.
Mm-hmm. And I would suggest, if you've never tried it, try it. Try saying to a kid that is going to get a consequence from you, because it makes sense for them to get a consequence, okay? Not because you're trying to be vengeful or something. But the next time you have that opportunity, say to a child, look, we're not going to deal with this right now. You're safe. I don't like this behavior. I want you to think about what you're going to do about it, but we are going to talk about it. Try not to worry. See what happens with that kid. Because I guarantee you that what's going to happen is they're going to think about it. And that's what you want ultimately, right? You want your kid to come with opportunities. And that's what I do with my kids is I say to them, something like that. Like I'm going to give them a deferred thing. And I say, I want you to think about how you can make this situation right and what your consequence should be for it. But I'm not going to worry about it right now. No, we're not going to not watch that show that we've been waiting to watch together. That's a non-contingent consequence. No, I'm not going to not say I love you or not tuck you in or not pray with you or not eat next to you like I somehow don't like you anymore. Like, that's not contingent. It's not true. But we need to deal with this because you're off the path. So right now you're safe. I got my eyes on you. I checked you. I know where you are. I can hear your voice. I'm going to pull you back onto the path. There's going to be consequences. Try not to worry about it. And they will come back to me and they'll be like, Dad, I've been thinking about this all week. Because I like to push consequences out for a long period of time. Because the longer you push them out, the longer you push them out and follow through, the more credibility you have. Because you've established that you do not forget. You've established that you can go for long periods of time and let things fluctuate, and you do not fluctuate. You're steady. This is in your radar. You understand it. It makes them think about their consequences for long periods of time. It also gives them the ability to experience the dissonance between your actions and your emotions. Lets them understand that they're not in danger emotionally, And so by the time that consequences, because they've lived past it. You're past that moment where you're like, I'm so scared, And so when you get consequences are now removed from emotions. This is just what it is, And that's what I tell my kids. You're paying the price for your actions. These are the wages of your sin. That's all it is. You're paying the price for your actions. If you don't like it, don't commit these, crimes, essentially. And they're removed from it now, So sometimes they're emotionally still in it where they're like, I'm afraid of the consequence, but they're removed from the, I have to regulate myself because I'm still pissed at my brother or, whatever. And so it's good for them to understand that. And it's also true. True to life, consequences are rarely in the moment. The big ones can be, but the long ones, you get prosecuted by the law. Sometimes it takes a year for the consequences to be handed out, So, excuse me. All right, so applying the cool method. Ask who has the control, ask who owns the problem, ask who's doing the thinking or making the decisions, and then ask, was empathy allowed to happen? Or let empathy happen. Those are questions that you ask. And if those things are happening, then the cool method's being applied. All right. Let me look at what we got. All right, we're real close here. So just a few things. 4 steps to proper growth. Give an individual a task that he or she can handle. Wait for them to fail at their task. And then give them empathy and allowance, cool method, for them to learn consequences. And then give them the same task again. You do that, the kid will grow. Simple. And that's why when a kid fails at something, you don't just take the task away from them. If you perceive they're capable of doing it, tell them to get up and finish the task. Do it differently, but finish the task. That's, or do it the same way because maybe it was a fluke. And this again, comes down to like a kid, when kids are first learning to walk. And sometimes you'll get teenagers or first-time parents or annoying grandparents who will come up and save the child, because they don't want them to fall over. It's like, no, let them fall over. Let them keep trying. That is a safe place for them to fail at something. You don't want them to fail at big things. You want them to fail at small things. And that's going to cause proper growth. And you don't have to be like, ha, 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 ha. The kid as they fail, you can be like, oh, that sucks. Get up. Come on. Let's do it again. Or you can be a little more conventional like I am, where I'm like, get up. You don't need to cry about that. Crying is for these things, and like you need to save those tears. They're valuable. Get up. Let's do it. Again, in either case, a kid is going to grow when you do that. You take it away from them, they will not grow.
Yeah, our society views mistakes or failure as negative. It's all around us, and that's not true. They're opportunity.
Yep. Consider it joy.
Look at Edison and the light bulb. Well, many of you may not know, but he tried more than 1,000 times before he got it to work. So it's opportunity. Mistakes, opportunity. Failure, opportunity.
Yeah, and that's getting harder and harder in our world where everything is so readily available to us. It's harder and harder to be able to make mistakes properly, like where we can just, have actual contingent consequences.
And that said, not only applied to your children, but applied to you as well. You work on this. If you do it incorrectly, or you make a mistake, or you don't apply it like you need to, get up, brush yourself off.
Yep.
Your kids will give you plenty of opportunity to retry it.
Yeah. Okay, so a reminder, it's naturally tempting to remind people about their responsibilities. If you keep saying to a child over and over and over, okay, now remember to do this. I just want to make sure you're doing this. Do you remember to do this? Are you making sure to do this? Do I check to do this? What you're teaching the child is that you don't actually trust them. So don't do that. You may think that you're giving opportunity to them, but you are, at that point, you're owning their problem. They need to own their own problem. Okay? Empathy and consequence, remember that. Empathy allows learning to occur rather than giving the individual an opportunity to focus on the anger of the leader. It builds relationship. It stimulates thinking. Contingent consequences allow individuals to own their own problem. And this is important because consequences are the world we live in, despite what it seems like on Snowflake Mountain. Remember to give empathy and then consequences. Like the order should be empathy first, then consequences. Develop your own empathic statement. That's lame, right? Or that sucks. I think I may say them almost interchangeably. That's lame, I say a lot too. practice, this thing says practice saying the statement. Basically what they want you to do is to do it until it becomes natural. Because it should, and we already talked about why, right? Because you're training a person to understand this is the order of things that's going to come. Look for opportunities to insert it so it becomes natural. And make sure you use it consistently to trigger a measured response. All right. That is my presentation. Any questions? Any practical questions?
I don't feel as bad now. So being a first-time parent and Plumber was starting to walk, I was sleeping in.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember we were at the Buckaroo and he was running around and he fell. And I don't know, something clicked in my brain was like, let him, like sit there. And he fell and he reached his hand up, not even looking, right? Like he anticipated
Yep.
me to be there. And I stood there and it was hard. I was like, oh, it looks like he fell down. What are you going to do about that? And he looked over and I could see it in his eyes where he's a little confused. And then it hit him like, oh shit, I can get up myself.
Yeah.
You know? But like inside I was like, oh, it was
Yeah.
hard. But now that's normal practice now. Now you just bouncing right back up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's difficult.
Yeah. Well, kids will train you if you don't train them.
Right.
That's the truth.
Yeah, I said it felt like he had to be trained already.
Yep.
Look, he just reached his hand up.
Yep.
So this was great. I appreciate you both taking time to do this.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Any questions? Anything we can clarify or any problem solving? Did you have something?
You had your hand up.
Not until we're done. Are we done? You guys feel good about it? Yeah? All right. Thank you.
What's the next one?
This is it. This is our basics.